Alvarez here, After Dark Radio. We are here every Wednesday, 2 Pacific, 5 Eastern, Sports Byline Broadcasting Network, as well as streaming live on our YouTube channel, f4wonline.com/YouTube. That is f4wonline.com/YouTube, and twitch.tv/f4w video. And we have a very exciting show for you today. It is a guest week here on the program, and we have a very special guest coming up in the next segment. His name is Jim Myers, and we're going to be talking Bigfoot here today on the show. He and his wife operate the Sasquatch Outpost, and we're going to tell you where you can head out to check that place out, and we'll tell you all of the stories that he has collected over the years, things he has experienced himself. And in fact, not only is he a Bigfoot/Sasquatch researcher, but the Sasquatch Outpost itself may be haunted. So Jim Myers will be joining us in the next segment. If you have questions for him, he's listening to the show, you're welcome to send them to me via email. The address is brian@afterdarkradioshow.com. That is brian@afterdarkradioshow.com. Any questions you have for Jim Myers, send to that address, and we'll get into them as we get going on the show here today. Got a lot of questions for him. Of course, don't forget, we've also got a new T-shirt, which is available, f4wonline.com/shirts. That is f4wonline.com/shirts. You can check those out today. And hey, if you want a cameo, I've been doing a lot of those. They're only $10 this month. I can do, I just did a cameo the other day, in fact, about the paranormal. Somebody asked me a question about Bigfoot. I gave an answer, and now that person who got a cameo, their question is essentially going to be asked to a Bigfoot researcher on the program today. F4W Online on Cameo. Grab yours today. Back in a moment with Jim Myers talking Bigfoot, After Dark Radio on the Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Show. Bryan Alvarez here, After Dark Radio. Very happy today to be joined by Jim Myers. We got a lot of stuff to talk about here today. And Jim, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thank you.
So, have you ever watched any professional wrestling?
Yeah.
Because, yes, I do a pro wrestling podcast as well, and that's actually my main gig. And I was searching for some information about you for this show, and George the Animal Steele. Do you remember George the Animal Steele?
I do not.
He was he's a fairly famous wrestler from the 80s. But anyway, his actual name was Jim Myers. So,
Was
of
it
course,
really?
yes, I'm looking for all this information on you, and I keep getting George the Animal Steele, who actually, ironically, he didn't have a Sasquatch gimmick, but he was called the Animal because his body was so hairy. And so he did the gimmick where, like, he was, I don't know, it was the 80s, so these were all kind of wacky, but he was kind of a subhuman, so he had hair all over his body. And so anyway, that was George the Animal Steele, Jim Myers, the other Jim Myers. But
all the times I've Googled my name, I have never seen that. So
really? It probably comes up for me because I probably have Googled Jim Myers several times. But well, let's talk about you, and I want to get off at least talking about the Sasquatch Outpost because, of course, we're going to be talking a lot about Sasquatch today. So tell everybody a little bit about the Outpost.
Well, the Outpost is just what it sounds like. It's a gift shop, it's a museum, and soon to be escape room devoted to Sasquatch. And all this came about back in 2012, 2013, when we had just moved to Colorado, and my lifelong interest in Sasquatch, we had been overseas for 20 years prior to this, and so I didn't have a lot of opportunity to pursue my interest. But once we moved back to the States, I did, and very quickly discovered that Bailey, Colorado, unbeknownst to me at the time, was a place that had many Bigfoot sightings over the years. And we kind of made a decision. We initially opened this place as a grocery store / mercantile, but very quickly we realized that we were going to starve to death trying to sell groceries, and the whole Bigfoot theme became kind of took on a life of its own. And once we started, showing an interest in this topic and then putting displays in the store on the topic, people just came out of the woodwork, and we eventually scrapped the whole grocery thing entirely and went with the Sasquatch theme, and we've never looked back. And so every summer we take people out on expeditions, multiple expeditions, hiking, camping, horseback, all with the interest of learning about Sasquatch and hopefully having an encounter with the Sasquatch.
You grew up in Kenya, is that right?
Correct.
Where were you overseas for the last 20 years, or the previous 20 years before 2012?
I lived for 10 years in West Africa in the country of Senegal. That was from about 89 to 99. And then from 99 to 09, we lived in France, although I spent most of my time traveling around North Africa, Middle East, and Central Asia as a crisis manager for a large nonprofit organization. So it was a very interesting time in our lives. I think I've told people that I've had 3 or 4 complete lifetimes in my lifetime, and people who moved to Bailey and only know us now have assumed that we've always been doing what we're doing now, which is lifetime number 4, I think.
It's funny because I turned 50 in June, and it does seem as you get older, as I look back, it's like every 10 years kind of feels like a different lifetime.
It does, doesn't it? And
Yes.
and I don't know why that is, but mine is really 10-year segments, except for this segment now. This is the longest I've lived anywhere.
Now,
Here in Colorado.
I asked about living overseas, and I was glad at least you said France. That's not exactly where I was hoping you would say, but it's close enough. So, London. I was just like a week ago reading about how there are apparently in the last, I don't know, 10 years or so, a large number of sightings of Bigfoot in and around London. Which when I read it, I at first I was like, "What?" And that's basically what the article said as well. It's like it doesn't really make any sense. You don't really think about London, but I guess there have been Bigfoot sightings around London in the last decade. And I don't know if you've read or know anything about that, but that seems somewhat
Well,
bizarre.
I know of quite a few in England as a country, or I should say in the UK. There have been quite a number of sightings. I am not familiar with the ones around London, but it doesn't surprise me because we have sightings around Denver. We have sightings in Bailey. I mean, it's people have this misunderstanding that to encounter a Sasquatch, you have to go into the deepest, remotest part of the wilderness, which is just not it's not true.
Well, I think that can sort of lead us into one direction here because I had somebody ask me a question the other day about Bigfoot. They had a theory that I guess their theory was that a portal had been opened and Bigfoot had come through this portal like 50 years ago or so, several of them. And one of them was what was seen in the Patterson Gimlin film. And I guess their theory is that they have now all since died. But when I first heard that, I was like, "This is quite the theory." But I mean, you believe that there is an interdimensional aspect to Bigfoot. This is not just an ape, correct?
100% correct.
But not necessarily that they came through a portal and they're now all dead.
Well, no, that part I've never heard that theory, but I can tell you emphatically that is not true. There are probably well, here's a couple of problems with that concept. One is there's reports of Sasquatch in North America going back to the Vikings, and certainly Native Americans over the past 200 to 400 years have had many encounters, have many tales within their tribes and within their oral history of Sasquatch. In fact, every Native American tribe that I've ever encountered has their own name and their own oral tradition about Sasquatch, which in and of itself is a proof for their existence. But there have been sightings in every single state in the continental U.S. and Alaska. There have been conservatively, and the reason I'm going to give this number is that most people who have had some type of encounter never talk about it. So we'll never know how many the true number is. But those who have talked about it, I would estimate it being at least 50,000 in this country. So, now the coming through portals, there's maybe some merit to that concept, but certainly not dying off because we've had many encounters over the past 10 years. So they are alive and well in Colorado.
All right, well, stand by. We're going to head to a break here, and when we come back, we're going to kind of follow up on that in terms of where Sasquatch has been seen. Back in a moment with more Jim Myers talking Bigfoot. After Dark Radio Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Alvarez here. After Dark Radio, Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Jim Myers joining us here today, and we're talking about Sasquatch, which I guess should be the proper term since Bigfoot term hasn't been around that long. Sasquatch been around a lot longer than that.
It has.
Now, when we talk about a paranormal aspect to Bigfoot, I got a few questions here, and one of them ties into what you talked about before the break, which is that Sasquatch has been seen in every state in the continental U.S. and Alaska. And, one thing I always wondered about is, why are there no Sasquatch reports from Hawaii? And if you presume like it's an animal, then you could say, okay, well, it's an island in the middle of the ocean. They never got there. But if we're talking an interdimensional aspect to it, one would think that they perhaps could get through to Hawaii through a portal. What are your thoughts on why no sightings in Hawaii?
Well, I don't know that there have not been sightings in Hawaii. I've heard rumors of sightings that I haven't followed up on, but when you consider the fact that Sasquatch exists on every continent, Australia, Eurasia, Asia, North America, Africa, reports from Africa, it would be surprising that they would not exist in Hawaii, even if you assumed, which I'm not sure is the truth, but if you assume that if you go back to when the continents were all together and then split apart and Sasquatch moved with the continents, but I think there is a possibility that they have been found in Hawaii, but certainly we don't get reports like we do from the continental U.S. And yes, you're correct. If the interdimensional side is true, why would they not be in Hawaii? I don't have a good answer for that, but I can tell you that they exist in places that people would never expect them to exist, as well as where they would expect them to exist, which is, in the millions and millions and millions of uninhabited acres of national forests in this country and in many countries and continents around the world. So, there's if you just look at our demographic and where people tend to live in mass populations, there's far more land where we don't live than where we do.
That is absolutely true. I'm here in the Pacific Northwest, so I'm looking out at it right now, actually.
Yes, perfect example.
Now, I guess the other question, you mentioned living in Africa off and on, and did you do any Bigfoot research before you moved here to the U.S.?
I was a child when I moved to Africa, and then when I lived in Africa as an adult, not really. I mean, for one, internet in the country we were living in at that time was a new thing and was not fast enough to allow for much research to be done. It was really when we moved to Colorado that I started hearing more about sightings, and then I met my very first eyewitness, and that one sighting, that one testimony, firsthand testimony, was more than sufficient to convince me that they were a reality because of who told me the story, how the story happened. I went to where it happened. Everything added up. And so since then, I've probably heard 500 at least stories of Sasquatch encounters. But I think that one was enough to get me going, just because I had some very strong opinions about whether they existed. But I needed to talk to somebody who had actually seen one, and that's what happened in 2012.
So, I've gone to a lot of Bigfoot conventions. I've heard a lot of speakers. I've had a lot of people on this show. And there seem to be the two camps. There's like the camp that thinks, okay, these are flesh and bone animals. There is no paranormal aspect to this whatsoever. And then there's the other camp that they believe there is a paranormal aspect. And these two camps can very much clash. This is a pretty big disagreement. And
Yes.
I have noticed that those that believe in the paranormal aspect, a lot of them started out believing that this was an animal, and then through their research, either it's talking to people or their own experience, something happened where they went, you know what, this flesh and blood thing, it just doesn't work anymore. Is that what happened with you, or did you always believe what you believe
No,
now?
that is definitely what happened with me. And I think that's what happens with most researchers I know start off believing it's a flesh and blood animal. I mean, that's where else are you going to start, to be honest? But I also made a decision, very conscious decision, when I started doing research that I was going to follow the evidence wherever it led me. And it has led me very strongly and without any questions to Sasquatch not only being possessing paranormal abilities, but being partially or even entirely human versus an ape. And so I honestly don't know, and I say this with all due respect to those who are on the opposite side of the camp who would say that they're a great ape. I don't know how you can be doing research for as many years as some of these men and women have and still come to that conclusion, because once I allowed myself to see and accept that this other side was there, and particularly the human genetic side of them, it's everywhere. I mean, I can't not find it. I can't not see it anymore. And so, there's I have tons of reasons why I believe they are not an ape, and I think, but you're very correct, Brian, that the two camps are diametrically opposed and often publicly so. People calling one another out by name at conferences, which I find repulsive personally. I don't think that's necessary. We can all do research our own way and come to our own conclusions without needing to denigrate someone else in the research they've done.
Now, it seems that if you're a person who doesn't believe in Bigfoot at all, a Bigfoot researcher would say, you've got to have an open mind. You have to at least look at this evidence and see what conclusion that you come to. And for those that do believe in Bigfoot, the people that believe in the paranormal aspect, I feel like they're basically saying that same thing to people who don't see the paranormal aspect. They're basically saying, like, you have to follow the evidence, and if you continue following the evidence, if you continue like looking at what we have here and not writing this off as, well, this can't be possible, the conclusion you come to is a flesh and bone animal doesn't make sense. Is that basically where you are?
Yes, and I mean, if you think about this, this is a very simple way to look at this, but today in captivity, I've done some research on this. Today in around the world, there are approximately 9,000 great apes in captivity, including chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, different versions of chimpanzees, different subspecies. And we've had them in captivity for well over 100 years. And if Sasquatch were simply a great ape, an undiscovered great ape, is it not logical that by now, if they live on our doorstep, we don't have to go to the Congo to find them or to the darkest forest of Rwanda. They're right here. They live on the edges of our cities. How have we never captured or had visual evidence of one being killed if they're just a great ape? It doesn't make any sense. So that, plus the fact that there is very credible historical and anecdotal evidence that would say that humans have the ability genetically to breed with Sasquatch and to create offspring when that is not possible with the great apes. There's no way a human and a gorilla or a chimpanzee could create a viable offspring. It just simply cannot happen. We're close, but we're not close enough. But apparently Sasquatch and humans are close enough to create offspring.
Do you believe that the paranormal aspect is the reason that we don't have a lot of trail cam footage of Bigfoot? You know, people who do these expeditions, they often talk about how we set up these cameras and just like, you know, there was something, but the camera short-circuited, and it said there's always an issue with the cameras. Do you think that is one of the reasons we have this problem?
Well, this is what I've found. Again, following the evidence where it led me, Sasquatch knows the difference between a camera, a video camera, or a photographic camera, and an audio recording device. And they just simply will not go in front of a camera of any kind, video or still shot, because I can only theorize why they wouldn't do that, but I think it's because that would put them into danger, because people who have an intention of killing them would know exactly where they are. Now,
actually, hold that thought for 1 second. We got to head to a break, but I want to pick up there when we come back. Back in a moment. After Dark Radio, Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Bryan Alvarez here, After Dark Radio, Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Jim Myers joining us here. And before the break, we were talking about trail cams and other, I guess really any camera, with one exception we're going to talk about in a moment. But go ahead and finish your thought about cams.
So I would say that the lack of photographic evidence, there is photographic evidence, and some of it's very compelling, including the one we're going to speak about. But not nearly what you would expect with all the cell phones that we have out there, millions of cell phones. So I think it's not so much a reflection of them being paranormal as it is of a reflection of their extreme intelligence, and they somehow know what a photo or video camera is. They avoid them like the plague, but you can put an audio recorder out in plain view. I've done it scores of times. They don't care. They'll walk around, they'll make noise, they'll vocalize, and leave it alone. But I've had them take cameras and I never see them again. They're just gone. Or I've had friends have their cameras smashed or turned around to the other side of the tree because it was pointing in a direction they wanted to go. So why that's such a anathema to them, I can't tell you, but they definitely know what the difference is, and they act accordingly.
Now, you've done a lot of expeditions. Have you ever seen Sasquatch with your own two eyes?
I have seen one in the daytime when I was fishing at a very popular tourist camping destination about 15 miles from Bailey, early in the morning, and it was standing above me on a rock outcropping and maybe 150 yards above me. Absolutely saw it, knew exactly what it was. A fish grabbed my fly. I turned my attention away from the Sasquatch for 2 seconds max and looked back, and it was gone. It had simply disappeared. But I've seen them many times at night just because of their eye glow, not eye shine, but eye glow. Their eyes emit light. I cannot explain it. I'm not even going to try. But it's a difference between other wildlife. Their eyes have a reflective layer at the back of the retina that reflects light back, usually green or white. Raccoons, deer, bears, any animals. Ironically, great apes and humans do not reflect light back from our eyes, but Sasquatch eyes emit light, and you can see it. I've seen it probably 36 times now at night, and I've seen them blink, and I have compelling video just of that phenomena of their eyes glowing, where I could even see the pupil in their eyes when they would look straight at me, but there was somehow light coming out of the rest of their eyeball, and I cannot explain it.
Now, I have never seen a Bigfoot, but I have seen the Patterson-Gimlin film like 1,000 times, and I cannot explain that one. I've read hundreds of pages of every argument for and against. And I mean, I have to say that, like, you know, I've read lots of people that try to explain why it's got to be a person. And I've read a lot of arguments from people that claim there's no way this was a person. And the people who claim there's no way it's a person make a significantly more compelling case to me. And I'm still waiting. It's 2025. This thing was shot in the late 1960s, and nobody has been able to recreate it. I mean, it's been decades, and I just cannot explain this one. I know it's one of the first things you ever saw that got you interested. What are your thoughts on the Patterson-Gimlin film?
I believe it's 100% genuine, and for many reasons, but probably the most compelling is that there are objects today in Bluff Creek that still are there that existed back in 67, that when you triangulate the video to determine height, she comes out somewhere between 7'3" to 7'6". So you would have to have an NBA basketball player with additional height to even come close to imitating that, what you see on that film. And when her footsteps in the sand are compared to humans who walk next to her footsteps, the depth of her steps in the sand indicate a weight 3 to 5 times what any human would have. And so just the logistical part of that, not to mention in 1967, I'm sure you've heard this argument, there was just not technology to build a suit that could do what we see in this film, certainly not by 2 rodeo cowboys who were out looking for Bigfoot. Planet of the Apes couldn't even reproduce anything remotely like it. And so
2001. 2001. They had those apes. Yeah, the film at the beginning of the movie, they had those apes, and I mean, those apes looked like people in suits.
People in
what they look
costumes.
like. Yeah, and even the one people always bring up is, well, Bob Hieronymus. They always have a video of him doing the walk, and they're like, see, it looks exactly like it. And when you look at it, it's like, yeah, to me, it looks exactly like a guy imitating what I saw in the film, but it doesn't actually look like what you see in the film. It looks like a guy that's doing a great job imitating it.
And he's like 5'11", so he would have had to have worn leg extensions, arm extensions, and you would have to believe that Bob Gimlin and Roger Patterson were complicit in this. I don't think there's anything, certainly in Bob's many, 60 years of testimony since then, that would indicate that he's a liar. But, getting back to the filming part, the fact that they got that film, I think, is due to this fact alone. Our current technology emits much that we don't know about. Emits infrared, emits high electronic signals of different kinds that I think Sasquatch picks up on. The camera that Roger Patterson used was a wind-up 16-millimeter camera that you would wind up. It would expend its energy and film as much as possible, and you would have to wind it up again. It was 100% mechanical. There was nothing that camera emitted. It was completely passive. If we're going to capture them on film, I think we're going to have to go backwards in technology, not forwards.
Yeah, there's so much wireless technology nowadays, and that camera that he used, as you noted, I mean, it's just a primitive, you wind that thing or whatever. And the other thing about it is it was shot on film, and even though we don't have the original, we have a first generation, but the original apparently has never been found. And even that original, it's like, because it was shot on film, I mean, you can really do a lot to clean that up. More so than like a primitive phone camera where you try to zoom in or whatever and you get all these digital artifacts. You got none of that on film.
Right. Very good point.
What is besides the Patterson Gimlin film? Like, if you had somebody that said, I don't believe in any of this, it's ridiculous. Besides the Patterson Gimlin film, is there like anything that you would point at as, okay, this is what I consider the best evidence of Bigfoot, besides seeing one with your own eyes? This is what you should check out to make your decision.
Check out a couple of things. There was a video that came out of Russia of, I think it was a father and a son in a wilderness area, and they hear a vocalization, and then they see something running in the distance. Maybe it looks like maybe a couple hundred yards from them, but running and leaping. It's enormous in size. It has huge long arms. For a person to imitate that, these are the videos that are most compelling to me. For a person to imitate that would be virtually impossible. And so, but I can't remember what they title that video. I just saw it recently. I should make a note of these things. The other is, there's a film of 2 hunters, bow hunters out of Idaho. I think you could find it by Googling Idaho elk hunter Bigfoot video, and I've used that in our museum as video evidence. But they had been out hunting. They were, I think, 8 miles from the nearest road, and they filmed a Sasquatch standing off to one side, watching them from behind some shrubbery next to a large tree, and just their response emotionally to what they saw, and it was. I'm convinced it was genuine, and it's very quick, as any of these are. They're very quick because the Sasquatch quickly will make its escape, or the person is running the opposite direction. But there is a great deal of evidence that's out there. I could probably give you 20 that I think are genuine, but many of them you have to look at the context. You have to look at the distance. Do some measuring using Google Earth to determine how fast was this thing walking or running, to determine that it probably was not a human.
Okay, we got about 2 minutes here, but I got to ask this question. So the American Sasquatch, you believe paranormal aspect to it. But of course, there are sightings of different, I don't know if species is the right word, but the Himalayas, there's the Yeti, there's the orang pendak, there's different, like all over the world, different creatures, different sizes. Do you believe there's a paranormal aspect to all of these? Do you believe that maybe some of them are, in fact, undiscovered primates? And I guess tying everything together for people that believe in UFOs and ghosts and fairies and whatever, do you think this is all one phenomenon?
Well, the first part of that question, I think everything that I've read about sightings of the Yowie in Australia or the Yeti, their behavior mimics virtually exactly what the North American Sasquatch demonstrates. So I would have to assume that they possess whatever abilities that North American Sasquatch does. They're just a different location, maybe a different type of Sasquatch, different size, etc. And here's how I'd answer the second part of that. Before I discovered that Sasquatch is real and that they exist in larger numbers than we could ever imagine, many things were simply a matter of fairy tales or bedtime stories. But now that I know that Sasquatch does exist, it opens up a plethora of other things that cause me to say, what isn't possible now? I mean, if Sasquatch is real, many things could be real that I've earlier in my life would have poo-pooed and said, well, that's simply ridiculous.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the Sasquatch Outpost here. Let's get a quick plug in, and then we'll talk a little bit more when we come back from the break.
Sure. You can find us at SasquatchOutpost.com. We have an online store. You can find any of the products that we sell, as well as some of my research evidence. If you're interested in doing one of the trips that we do in the summers, you can go to rabbitholeadventures.co and find all the trips that we have lined up. But we're located at 149 Main Street in downtown Bailey, Colorado.
All right, back in a moment with more, everybody. After Dark Radio on the Sports Byline Broadcasting Network. Here, After Dark Radio Sports Byline Broadcasting Network, Jim Myers joining us here today, and you can check out the Sasquatch Outpost at SasquatchOutpost.com. A lot of stuff there, including, I guess you sell squatching gear. Is that correct?
We do sell some, yeah.
All right. And that's the Sasquatch Outpost and Discover Museum, 149 Main Street in Bailey, Colorado, 80421. And let's get some final plugs in here. Anything else we haven't got out there yet?
No, here's what I would just say as a parting thought is for many of your listeners who maybe are thinking, well, this is, nice science fiction or fairy tales, I'm going to guess that today, more people have probably seen a Sasquatch in the flesh than people who have seen a mountain lion in the wild. And they just simply don't talk about it. So you probably know someone, or certainly at the furthest, you know someone who knows someone who has seen a Bigfoot. Just start asking around, and I'll bet you're going to be surprised who you find out that's had some kind of an encounter.
Well, Jim, I want to thank you so much for doing the show today. Hopefully we can do this sometime in the future as well. Check out the SasquatchOutpost.com, and we are totally out of time. Thanks for listening today, After Dark Radio Sports Byline Broadcasting Network.